They threw her off a cliff to die. The ruthless alpha who raised her decided she wasn't worth keeping, so he dragged her to the edge of Ravenfall and hurled her into the frozen river below. Everyone thought the current had swallowed her whole, but the water carried her broken body straight into forbidden territory, the land of the most feared ruler alive. And the first creature to find her wasn't a predator. It was a silent wolf pup who hadn't spoken since his mother burned to death. That pup was the only son of Alpha King Darius Voss, a warlord so dangerous his borders were marked on every map as a place no one returned from. If you want to see how a girl left for dead became the queen of the most powerful wolf dynasty in existence, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. Let's get started. The wind screamed across the top of Ravenfall Cliff like something dying. Elena Vale stood at the edge, her bare feet numb against the frozen stone, her wrists bound with silver chain that burned through her skin like fire. Blood dripped from her knuckles. Her breathing came shallow and sharp. She didn't look at the drop. She already knew what was down there. A roaring winter river surrounded by jagged rocks and unforgiving dark. Behind her, Alpha Drake Holloway stood with his arms crossed, his face carved from stone and contempt. "You've been a burden long enough," he said. His voice was flat, clinical, like he was putting down a lame horse. Elena turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "You raised me. I made a mistake." The words hit harder than any fist ever had. Drake stepped closer, boots crunching over ice. His pack stood in a half circle behind him, 20 wolves in human form, all watching in silence. None of them moved to stop this. None of them even looked surprised. "You were supposed to shift by now," Drake continued. "You were supposed to prove you had wolf blood. But you're 18 years old and you're still human. That makes you a liability. And I don't keep liabilities." Elena's jaw tightened. "I've done everything you asked. I've trained harder than anyone. You've embarrassed me," Drake cut her off. "At every council, every alliance meeting, every gathering. They see you and they laugh. They ask me why I keep a pet." The word landed like a slap. Elena's breath hitched, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Then let me leave. I'll go. You'll never see me again." Drake smiled, cold and mirthless. "No, you won't." He nodded to two of his enforcers. They grabbed her by the shoulders and dragged her forward. Elena's feet slid across the ice. She twisted, tried to pull free, but the silver chain sapped her strength. Her voice broke as she shouted, "Drake, please! Throw her!" The enforcers didn't hesitate. They hurled her off the cliff like she weighed nothing. For a single suspended moment, Elena was weightless. The wind roared in her ears, the sky spun, the river below rushed up to meet her, black and violent and endless. Then she hit the water. The cold was a knife through her chest. The current grabbed her immediately, dragging her under, slamming her into rocks she couldn't see. She tried to swim, but the chains pulled her down. Her lungs screamed, her vision blurred. She thought about fighting. Then she thought about letting go. The river made the choice for her. It carried her downstream faster and faster, through rapids and falls and freezing dark, until finally, mercifully, she stopped feeling anything at all. When Elena woke, she was still in the water. But the current had slowed. She was floating now, half submerged, her body tangled in reeds along the riverbank. The sky above her was gray and endless. Snow drifted down in silence. She tried to move. Pain exploded through her ribs, her shoulder, her leg. She gasped and choked on river water, coughing violently as she dragged herself forward inch by inch until she collapsed on the frozen mud of the shore. Her vision swam. She could barely lift her head. But she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. Elena lay there for a long time, shivering so hard her teeth cracked together. She didn't know where she was, didn't know how far the river had carried her, didn't know if Drake's territory was behind her or if she'd crossed into something worse. She only knew one thing. She had to keep moving. Slowly, agonizingly, she pushed herself to her knees. Her hands were still bound. The silver had burned through her wrists, leaving raw, blistered wounds. She bit down on a scream and used her teeth to work at the knot until the chain finally loosened and fell away. Her wrists bled freely now, but at least she could move. Elena staggered to her feet, swaying like a drunk, and looked around. The forest surrounding her was unlike anything she'd ever seen. The trees were massive, ancient oaks and pines so tall they blotted out the sky. The undergrowth was dense and dark, tangled with thorns and shadow. The air itself felt heavy, oppressive, like the land was watching her. And then she smelled it. Wolf. Not just one, many. Her pulse quickened. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes. Just silence. And then, from somewhere deep in the forest, a howl rose into the air. It was long and low and bone deep, the kind of sound that made prey animals freeze in place and wait to die. Elena's breath caught. She knew that howl. It wasn't a call. It was a warning. You're in our territory now. She took a step back toward the river, then stopped. There was nowhere to go. Behind her was the water that had nearly killed her. Ahead was a forest full of wolves that would absolutely finish the job. She was injured, freezing, unarmed, and alone. And then she heard it, a sound so small she almost missed it. A whimper. Elena turned sharply, ignoring the fire in her ribs, and looked toward a cluster of rocks near the water's edge. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a wolf pup. It was tiny, no bigger than a house cat, with black fur that gleamed like oil in the dim light. It sat perfectly still, watching her with unblinking amber eyes. Elena's breath slowed. She didn't move. The pup didn't either. They stared at each other for a long, frozen moment, and then the pup took a step forward. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct told her to run, but she didn't. She couldn't. Something about the way the pup looked at her, quiet, curious, unafraid, kept her rooted in place. The pup took another step, then another, until it was standing right in front of her. Elena slowly lowered herself to her knees, wincing as her ribs screamed in protest. She extended one shaking hand, palm up, and held it there. The pup sniffed her fingers. Then it pressed its small, cold nose into her palm. Elena exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Hey," she whispered. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The pup tilted its head as if considering her words. And then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the air around the pup shimmered. Elena's eyes went wide. The black fur rippled and dissolved. Tiny limbs stretched and reformed. And suddenly, where the wolf pup had been, there was a small boy. He looked no older than 5 or 6, with messy black hair and pale skin and the same amber eyes that had watched her so carefully moments before. He was barefoot, dressed in an oversized shirt that hung past his knees, and he stood perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Elena's mouth opened, but no words came out. The boy didn't speak either. He just stared at her, silent and unblinking, as if waiting for something. And then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Kael." The word was low and cold and absolute. Elena's head snapped up. A figure stepped out from between the trees. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and a presence that made the air itself feel smaller. His hair was dark, almost black, and his eyes were the same piercing amber as the boy's. He wore black from head to toe, and when he moved, it was with the kind of predatory grace that made it clear what he was. Alpha. Not just any alpha, the kind of alpha that other alphas feared. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze locked on Elena with the focus of a hunter sizing up prey. "You're trespassing," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. Elena tried to stand, but her legs gave out. She collapsed back onto her knees, gasping as pain shot through her side. The man's eyes narrowed. "Who sent you?" "No one," Elena managed. I didn't mean to." "Then how did you get here?" "The river." Her voice cracked. "I was thrown off Ravenfall Cliff. The current carried me downstream. I didn't know where I was going. I swear." "Ravenfall Cliffs," the man repeated, his tone flat. "That's Drake Holloway's territory." Elena's heart sank. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression that gave nothing away. "You're human." It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. "And Drake threw you into the river." She nodded again. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Why?" Elena swallowed hard. "Because I couldn't shift. Because I'm useless to him." The word tasted like poison. The man said nothing for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to the boy, Kael, who was still standing beside Elena, silent and unmoving. "Kael," the man said again, his voice softer now. "Come here." The boy didn't move. The man's eyes darkened. Now. Still, the boy didn't budge. Instead, he did something that made Elena's blood run cold. He stepped in front of her, between her and the Alpha. The man went very, very still. "Kael," he said slowly, "what are you doing?" The boy didn't answer. He just stood there, small and silent and immovable, his amber eyes locked on the man with a stubbornness that was almost heartbreaking. The man's expression shifted. Something Elena couldn't quite name flickered across his face. Surprise? Confusion. And maybe, just maybe, something close to pain. "She's a trespasser," the man said quietly. "She doesn't belong here." The boy shook his head. "She's injured. She's human. She's a stranger." The boy shook his head again. The man exhaled slowly, his jaw working like he was fighting some internal battle. Then he crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "Kael," he said, his voice gentler now. "You haven't spoken in 2 years, not since your mother died. And now you want to protect a stranger?" The boy didn't speak, but he didn't move either. The man stared at him for a long, heavy moment. Then he stood, his gaze shifting back to Elena. "What's your name?" he asked. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "Elena. Elena Valley." The man studied her in silence. Then he turned and started walking back toward the trees. "Bring her," he said over his shoulder. Elena's heart skipped. "Wait, what? Where?" The man stopped and looked back at her, his amber eyes cold and unreadable. "You're in Obsidian territory now," he said, "the land of Alpha King Darius Voss, and my son has claimed you as his." Elena's breath caught. Alpha King. The words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. She'd heard stories about Darius Voss. Everyone had. He ruled the largest, most feared wolf territory on the continent. His borders were marked on every map as a place you didn't cross unless you wanted to disappear. He'd fought wars, crushed rebellions, and executed challengers without hesitation. And now she was standing in his forest, barely able to walk, with his son standing between her and certain death. "I didn't ask to be here," Elena said, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask for any of this." Darius's expression didn't change. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here. And until I decide what to do with you, you'll stay in the fortress. And if I refuse?" Darius's eyes flashed. "Then I'll kill you where you stand and save myself the trouble." Elena's mouth went dry. Darius turned again and continued walking. The boy, Kael, looked up at Elena with those wide amber eyes. Then he reached out and took her hand. His small fingers were warm against her frozen skin. Elena looked down at him, her chest tightening. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Together, they followed the Alpha King into the forest. Basim. The obsidian fortress was a nightmare carved from stone. It rose out of the mountainside like something ancient and angry, all black rock and sharp angles and towering walls. Torches burned along the battlements, casting flickering shadows across the snow. Wolves patrolled the perimeter, massive scarred creatures that watched Elena with flat, predatory eyes as she limped through the gates. Inside, the halls were just as cold. The floors were polished obsidian. The ceilings stretched high and dark. Everything echoed, footsteps, voices, breathing. It felt like walking through a tomb. Darius led them through a series of corridors without speaking. Kael stayed close to Elena, his hand still wrapped around hers. She could feel him trembling slightly, though she didn't know if it was from cold or fear or something else. Finally, Darius stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. "This will be your room," he said. "You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you." Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. Darius opened the door and stepped aside. The room was sparse but clean. A bed, a table, a fireplace that was already burning. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and that was more than Elena had expected. She stepped inside, then turned back to look at Kael. The boy was still standing in the hallway watching her. "Go to your room, Kael," Darius said quietly. The boy didn't move. Darius's jaw tightened. "Kael!" Elena knelt down, ignoring the scream of her ribs, and looked the boy in the eye. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow. I promise." Kale stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He let go of her hand and stepped back, his amber eyes never leaving hers. Darius placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and guided him away. Elena watched them disappear down the hall. Then she closed the door and sank onto the edge of the bed. Her whole body was shaking. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know what was going to happen to her. All she knew was that she'd survived. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of scratching at her door. She sat up slowly, wincing as her ribs protested. Her whole body ached. Her wrists were still raw and blistered. But she was alive. The scratching came again. Elena stood and crossed to the door, pulling it open. Kale stood in the hallway, still in his oversized shirt, his black hair sticking up in every direction. He looked up at her with those wide, amber eyes, and then he held out his hand. Elena stared at him. "You want me to come with you?" she asked. Kale nodded. Elena hesitated. Then she took his hand. Together, they walked through the fortress. Kale led her down corridors and up staircases, through rooms she didn't recognize, past wolves who watched them with silent suspicion. No one stopped them. No one spoke. Finally, Kale pushed open a door at the end of a long hallway. Inside was a library. It was beautiful, shelves packed with books, tall windows letting in pale morning light, a fireplace crackling in the corner. It was the warmest room Elena had seen since arriving. Kyle pulled her inside and pointed to a chair by the fire. Elena sank into it gratefully. Kyle climbed into the chair beside her, curling up with his knees tucked under his chin, and watched her. "You don't talk much, do you?" Elena said softly. Kyle shook his head. "That's okay," Elena said. "You don't have to." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. And for the first time in days, Elena felt something close to peace. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine formed. Every morning, Kyle would come to Elena's door and lead her through the fortress. Sometimes they went to the library. Sometimes they walked the grounds. Sometimes they just sat together in silence. Elena didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She just existed. And slowly, carefully, Kyle began to open up. Not with words. He still didn't speak, but with gestures, with drawings. With the way he'd reach for her hand when he was scared, or the way he'd lean against her when he was tired. He was healing, and so was she. But not everyone in the fortress was happy about it. One afternoon, Elena was walking through the main hall when a voice cut through the air. "You're the human." Elena turned. A woman stood at the top of the stairs, tall, sharp-featured, with silver blonde hair and cold blue eyes. She wore a tailored black dress and moved with the kind of confidence that screamed authority. "I'm Elena," Elena said carefully. The woman descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking against the stone. "I'm Counselor Marin Ashford," the woman said. "I advise the Alpha King on matters of security and diplomacy." Elena nodded. "Nice to meet you." Marin's smile was thin. "I'll be direct. You don't belong here." Elena's chest tightened. "I didn't ask to be here. And yet here you are, living in the Alpha King's fortress, walking his halls, spending time with his son." "Kyle asked for my company," Elena said quietly. "I didn't force anything." "Kyle is a child," Marin said sharply. "A traumatized child who hasn't spoken since his mother died. He doesn't know what he needs, but I do." Elena's jaw tightened. "And what's that?" "Stability, structure, not a stranger who stumbled in from enemy territory." "I'm not a threat." Marin stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You're human. You have no wolf, no pack, no power, and yet you've somehow convinced the Alpha King to let you stay. That makes you either very clever or very dangerous." "I'm neither," Elena said. "I'm just trying to survive." Marin studied her for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away, her voice echoing down the hall. "We'll see." That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Marin's words looping through her mind. "You don't belong here." She was right. Elena didn't belong in a fortress full of wolves. She didn't belong in the territory of an alpha king. She didn't belong anywhere. But Kyle had chosen her, and for some reason, that mattered. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Elena sat up. "Come in." The door opened. Darius stepped inside. Elena's breath caught. He filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her. "Can't sleep?" he asked finally. Elena shook her head. Darius stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He crossed to the fireplace and stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him. "Marin spoke to you," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena swallowed. "She thinks I don't belong here." "She's not wrong." The words hit like a punch. Darius turned to face her. "You're human. You have no pack, no status, no power. By every law we have, you shouldn't be here." Elena's throat tightened. "Then why am I?" Darius's jaw worked. "Because my son hasn't spoken in 2 years. And the first person he's shown any interest in is you." Elena looked down at her hands. "I don't know why he chose you," Darius continued. "I don't know what he sees in you, but he did. And I won't take that away from him." Elena's chest ached. "But," Darius said, his voice hardening, "if you do anything to hurt him, if you betray his trust, if you use him, if you bring danger to this fortress, I will end you. Do you understand?" Elena met his gaze. "I understand." Darius held her stare for a long moment. Then he turned and left without another word. Elena sat in the darkness, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she'd gotten herself into, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let Kyle down. The weeks that followed became a careful dance between survival and suspicion. Elena moved through the obsidian fortress like a ghost, present but not quite visible, tolerated but never welcomed. The wolves who patrolled the halls watched her with eyes that tracked every step, every breath, every movement. She could feel their judgment like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. But Kyle didn't care what they thought. Every morning, he appeared at her door with the same quiet determination, his small hand reaching for hers, his amber eyes steady and sure. And every morning, Elena took his hand and followed him through the fortress, ignoring the whispers that trailed behind them like smoke. It was during one of these morning walks that Elena first saw the training grounds. They were massive, a sprawling courtyard of packed dirt and stone, surrounded by high walls and filled with wolves in various stages of combat. Some fought in human form, fists and feet flying in brutal precision. Others shifted mid-battle, their bodies rippling and reforming in seconds, claws tearing through the air. Elena stopped at the edge of the courtyard, her breath catching. She'd seen pack training before. Drake's enforcers had drilled every day, their routines designed to break bones and build killers. But this was different. This was organized chaos, each movement calculated, each strike deliberate. These weren't just fighters, they were weapons. Kyle tugged on her hand, pulling her attention down to him. He pointed across the courtyard. Elena followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. Darius stood in the center of the training ring, bare-chested and covered in a thin sheen of sweat, his muscles coiled and ready. He was sparring with 3 wolves at once, all of them larger than average, all of them moving with the kind of speed that should have been impossible. But Darius was faster. He moved like water, slipping between strikes, redirecting momentum, using his opponent's strength against them. One wolf lunged. Darius sidestepped and drove an elbow into the wolf's ribs, sending him sprawling. Another attacked from behind. Darius spun and caught the wolf's wrist, twisting until the attacker dropped to his knees with a pained shout. The third wolf shifted mid-leap, his body transforming into a massive gray beast with fangs the size of daggers. Darius didn't flinch. He met the wolf head-on, catching the creature by the throat and slamming it into the ground with enough force to crack the stone beneath them. The wolf yelped and shifted back into human form, gasping for air. Darius released him and stepped back, his chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. "Again," he said. The 3 wolves staggered to their feet, bruised and bloodied, and attacked. Elena watched, her heart pounding. She'd never seen anyone move like that. Drake had been strong, brutal even, but this was something else entirely. This was power without hesitation, precision without mercy. Impressive, isn't it? Elena turned sharply. Marin stood beside her, arms crossed, her cold blue eyes fixed on the training ring. He's the strongest alpha on the continent, Marin continued. Undefeated in combat, unmatched in strategy. Every pack that's ever challenged him has been crushed. Elena said nothing. Marin glanced down at Kael, her expression softening slightly. The boy shouldn't be here. This is no place for a child. He wanted to come, Elena said quietly. He's fixated on you, Marin said, her tone sharpening. And that's a problem. Why? Marin's gaze snapped to Elena. Because you're a distraction. The Alpha King has enemies on every border, packs that want his territory, rivals that want his throne. He can't afford to be distracted by a human who wandered in from the river. I'm not asking for his attention, Elena said. You don't have to ask, Marin replied. You're here. That's enough. Before Elena could respond, a shout erupted from the training ring. One of the wolves had gone rogue. He was young, maybe 20, with wild eyes, and a body that was trembling with barely controlled rage. He lunged at Darius with a roar, shifting mid-leap into a massive black wolf with foam dripping from its jaws. The courtyard went silent. Darius caught the wolf by the scruff of its neck and slammed it to the ground. Control yourself, Darius said, his voice low and deadly. The wolf snarled and snapped at him, its claws raking across the stone. Darius's eyes flashed amber. I said, control yourself. The wolf thrashed, but Darius held it in place with one hand, his grip unbreakable. And then, slowly, the wolf's struggles weakened, its breathing slowed. Its body went still. Darius released it and stepped back. The wolf shifted back into human form, gasping and shaking, his eyes wide with fear. Get out of my sight, Darius said. The young man scrambled to his feet and ran. The courtyard remained silent. Darius turned, his gaze sweeping across the gathered wolves. Anyone else want to lose control? No one moved. Good. Darius grabbed a towel from the side of the ring and wiped the sweat from his face. Training's over. Dismissed. The wolves dispersed quickly, their heads down, their movements careful. Darius's gaze landed on Elena. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Kael let go of Elena's hand and ran across the courtyard. Kael, Elena started, but the boy was already at his father's side, wrapping his small arms around Darius's leg. Darius froze. His expression shifted, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face before he buried it again. He crouched down and placed a hand on Kael's head. You're supposed to be in lessons. Kael shook his head. You can't skip lessons just because you don't feel like going. Kael pointed at Elena. Darius's jaw tightened. He looked up at her, his amber eyes unreadable. She's not going anywhere, Darius said quietly. You'll see her later. Kael's grip tightened on his father's arm. Darius exhaled slowly. Then he stood, lifting Kael into his arms with one smooth motion. Come on, he said. Let's get you back to the library. He walked past Elena without another word, Kael's head resting against his shoulder. Elena watched them go, her chest tight. Marin's voice cut through the silence. You see the problem now? Elena turned to her. The boy is attached to you, Marin said, and the Alpha King won't let anything hurt his son. That means as long as you're here, you're protected. But protection comes with a price. What price? Elena asked. Marin's smile was cold. The price of being useful. If you can't contribute to this pack, you become a liability. And Darius Voss doesn't keep liabilities. The words echoed in Elena's mind long after Marin walked away. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Marin's warning looping through her thoughts. You have to be useful. But how? She wasn't a fighter. She couldn't shift. She had no skills, no training, no power. She was just human. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her spiraling thoughts. Elena sat up. Come in. The door opened, and a young woman stepped inside. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, with curly brown hair and warm hazel eyes. She carried a tray laden with food and moved with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she wasn't used to being noticed. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said quickly. I just thought you might be hungry. You didn't come to dinner. Elena blinked. I didn't know there was dinner. The woman set the tray on the table beside the bed. There's always dinner, in the main hall. But I understand if you don't want to go. It can be intimidating. That was an understatement. Thank you, Elena said. I appreciate it. The woman smiled shyly. I'm Lyra. I work in the kitchens. Elena. I know. Lyra hesitated, then added, Everyone knows. You're the human who washed up in the river, the one Kael won't leave alone. Elena's chest tightened. Is that a problem? For some people, yes. Lyra glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. But not for me. I think it's good for him. He's been so sad since his mother died, and now he actually smiles sometimes. Elena's throat tightened. He smiles? When he's with you, yes. Lyra's smile widened. You're good for him. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Before Elena could respond, Lyra slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Elena stared at the tray of food, warm bread, roasted meat, steaming vegetables, and felt something crack inside her chest. She wasn't alone. Not completely. The next morning, Kael led Elena to a part of the fortress she hadn't seen before. It was a greenhouse, a massive glass structure built into the side of the mountain, filled with plants and flowers and trees that shouldn't have been able to grow in this climate. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of earth and green things. Kael pulled her inside and pointed to a row of small pots lined up on a wooden bench. Elena knelt down to look. They were seedlings, tiny green shoots just beginning to push through the soil. Did you plant these? Elena asked. Kael nodded. What are they? Kael pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. Elena unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, crude but earnest, of a flower with bright red petals. Your mother's favorite? Elena guessed. Kael nodded again, his eyes shining. Elena's chest ached. They're beautiful, Kael. She would have loved them. Kael looked up at her, and for the first time Elena saw something other than sadness in his eyes. Hope. But hope was a fragile thing in the Obsidian Fortress. 2 days later, a scout returned from the southern border with news that turned the entire fortress on edge. Drake Holloway had been seen near the boundary line. The report came during a council meeting, one Elena wasn't supposed to attend but overheard anyway thanks to Lyra, who whispered the details while delivering food to Elena's room. They're saying Drake's planning something, Lyra said, her voice low. He's been gathering rogues. Wolves without packs, mercenaries, the kind of fighters who don't care about honor or rules. Elena's blood ran cold. Why would he come here? I don't know, Lyra said, but the Alpha King is furious. He's doubled the patrols and ordered the council to prepare for a potential attack. Elena's hands trembled. Drake knows I'm here. Lyra's eyes widened. How would he know that? He's the one who threw me into the river, Elena said. If he's near the border, he's looking for me. Why? You're just a human, Elena finished bitterly. I know, but Drake doesn't leave loose ends. If he thinks there's even a chance I survived, he'll come for me. Not because I'm a threat, because I'm an embarrassment. Lyra's face paled. You have to tell the Alpha King. He won't believe me. You don't know that. But Elena did. She'd seen the way Darius looked at her, like she was a problem he didn't know how to solve. He'd tolerated her presence because of Kael, but that didn't mean he trusted her. And if Drake was coming, Elena had two choices: run or fight. That night, Elena made her decision. She found Darius in the war room, a stark, windowless chamber filled with maps and reports and the heavy weight of command. He stood at the center of the room, his hands braced on the table, his eyes scanning the documents in front of him. Alpha King, Elena said from the doorway. Darius looked up, his expression hardening. You shouldn't be here. I know, Elena said, but I need to tell you something. Darius straightened. Make it quick. Elena stepped inside, her heart pounding. Drake Holloway is looking for me. Darius's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? Because he's the one who threw me off Ravenfall Cliff. And if he's gathering rogues near your border, It's because he knows I might have survived. Darius studied her in silence. Why would he care? Because I'm a reminder, Elena said. A reminder that he made a mistake, that he's not infallible, and Drake doesn't tolerate mistakes. Darius's jaw tightened. You think he'd attack my territory just to kill one human? I think he'd use it as an excuse, Elena said. You're the most powerful alpha on the continent. Every rival you have wants to see you fall. If Drake can weaken you, distract you, he'll take the opportunity. Darius didn't respond. Elena took a breath. I don't want to bring danger to your pack. If you want me to leave, I will, but you need to know what's coming. Darius was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You're not leaving. Elena blinked. What? If Drake wants you, he'll have to come through me. Darius's eyes flashed amber. And I don't lose. Elena's breath caught. But, Darius continued, his voice dropping, if you're going to stay, you're going to make yourself useful. You can't fight. You can't shift. So you're going to learn how to survive. What do you mean? Darius crossed to the door and opened it. Training starts tomorrow. Dawn. Don't be late. Dawn came too quickly. Elena stood in the center of the training courtyard, shivering in the cold morning air, dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame. Darius stood across from her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. First rule, he said, you're smaller than every wolf in this fortress. Weaker, slower. If you try to fight like them, you'll lose. Elena swallowed. So what do I do? You fight smarter. Darius stepped closer. You learn to read movement, anticipate attacks, use your opponent's strength against them. How? Darius grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward. Elena stumbled, off balance. Darius caught her before she fell. Like that. You're not strong enough to break my grip, but if I pull you, you can use the momentum to strike. He demonstrated slowly, guiding her through the motion. Pull, pivot, strike. Elena tried to mimic it. She failed. Tried again. Failed again. Darius didn't comment. He just reset and repeated the motion over and over until Elena's muscles screamed and her breathing came in ragged gasps. Again, Darius said. Elena gritted her teeth and lunged. This time, she didn't fall. Darius caught her strike with one hand and stopped it an inch from his chest. Better, he said. Elena's heart pounded. For the first time since arriving at the Obsidian Fortress, she felt something other than fear. She felt possibility, sad. The training continued every morning for the next 2 weeks. Darius was a brutal teacher, demanding, relentless, and utterly unforgiving. He didn't coddle her, didn't slow down, didn't make excuses. And Elena didn't ask for any. She learned to fall without breaking, to dodge without thinking, to read the shift in weight that came before a strike. She learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the one who refused to quit. But not everyone approved. One afternoon, Marin cornered Elena in the hallway outside the training courtyard. You're wasting his time, Marin said bluntly. Elena wiped the sweat from her face. He's the one who offered to train me. He offered out of obligation, Marin said, because you're tied to his son. But that doesn't mean you're worth the effort. Elena's jaw tightened. I'm doing my best. Your best isn't good enough. Marin stepped closer, her voice dropping. You're a human in a world of wolves. You will never be one of us, and the longer you stay, the more danger you bring. I'm not the one gathering rogues at the border, Elena shot back. Marin's eyes flashed. No, but you're the reason they're coming. The words hit like a slap. Before Elena could respond, a shout echoed from the courtyard. Both women turned. Kael stood at the edge of the training ring, his small body trembling, his amber eyes locked on something in the distance. Elena's heart stopped. She followed his gaze. Beyond the walls of the fortress, smoke rose into the sky. Black, thick, billowing. And then, from the watchtower, a horn sounded. Long, low, urgent. The fortress exploded into motion. Wolves poured into the courtyard, shifting and snarling, their eyes bright with battle-ready fury. Darius appeared at the top of the stairs, his voice cutting through the chaos. Drake Holloway has crossed the border, he said. He's brought an army. Elena's blood turned to ice. Darius's gaze found hers across the courtyard. This is what you warned me about, he said. Now, let's see if you were right. The horn sounded again, and the war began. The battle erupted like a wildfire. Within minutes, the obsidian fortress transformed from a place of cold order into a war zone of blood and chaos. Wolves poured through the gates in waves. Drake's rogues, filthy and scarred and desperate, clashing against Darius's elite warriors in a storm of fangs and fury. The air filled with the sound of snarling, the crack of bone, the wet thud of bodies hitting stone. Elena stood frozen in the courtyard, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a skirmish. This was an invasion. "Get inside!" Darius's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Elena turned and saw him descending the stairs, already shifting mid-stride. His body rippled and reformed in seconds. Massive black wolf, eyes blazing amber, muscles coiled with lethal power. He hit the ground running and tore into the first wave of rogues with devastating precision. But Elena couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on the smoke rising beyond the walls, on the shadows of wolves flooding through the broken gate, on the sheer number of attackers pouring into the fortress. Drake hadn't come with a raiding party. He'd come with an army. "Elena!" Lyra's voice snapped her back to the present. The young woman grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the main hall. "We need to get you out of sight. If Drake's looking for you—" "Where's Kyle?" Elena interrupted, her voice sharp with panic. Lyra's face paled. "He was in the library, but—" Elena was already running. She tore through the fortress, ignoring Lyra's shouts behind her, her feet pounding against the stone floors. Her ribs screamed in protest, her lungs burned. But she didn't stop. She had to find Kyle. The library doors were open. Elena skidded to a halt in the doorway, her breath catching. Kyle stood in the center of the room, small and trembling, his amber eyes wide with fear. Books lay scattered across the floor. A window had been shattered, glass glittering like ice across the carpet. And standing between Kyle and the broken window was a rogue wolf. It was massive, easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with matted gray fur and yellow eyes that gleamed with hunger. Foam dripped from its jaws. Its body was scarred and twisted, the kind of damage that came from years of fighting and losing and refusing to die. The rogue took a step toward Kyle. Elena moved without thinking. She grabbed a heavy iron candlestick from the table near the door and hurled it at the wolf's head. It struck with a satisfying crack. The rogue yelped and spun toward her, snarling. Elena's blood ran cold. She had no weapon, no plan, no chance. But she stood her ground. "Kyle," she said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. "Get behind me." Kyle didn't move. The rogue lunged. Elena threw herself to the side, barely avoiding the snapping jaws. She hit the floor hard, pain exploding through her shoulder. The rogue landed and spun, its claws scraping against the stone. Elena scrambled backward, her hand closing around a shard of broken glass. The rogue lunged again. Elena drove the glass into its eye. The wolf howled and reared back, shaking its head violently. Blood sprayed across the floor. Elena didn't wait. She grabbed Kyle and ran. They burst out of the library and into the hallway just as the rogue recovered and charged after them. Elena could hear its claws skittering against the stone, could feel its hot breath on the back of her neck. She turned a corner and slammed into someone. Darius. He was in human form again, his chest heaving, his hands covered in blood. His eyes went wide when he saw them. "Kyle." The rogue exploded around the corner. Darius moved like lightning. He caught the wolf mid-leap, his hands closing around its throat, and slammed it into the wall with enough force to crack the stone. The rogue thrashed and snarled, but Darius held it in place, his grip unbreakable. "Take him," Darius said, his voice low and deadly. "Now." Elena didn't argue. She grabbed Kyle's hand and ran. Behind her, she heard the wet crunch of bones snapping, then silence. Elena didn't stop running until they reached the reinforced chamber deep beneath the fortress, a stone room with iron doors and no windows, designed to withstand sieges. Inside, she found a dozen women and children huddled together, their faces pale and frightened. Lyra was there, along with Marin, who stood near the door with her arms crossed and her expression carved from ice. "You brought the boy," Marin said flatly. Elena nodded, still catching her breath. Marin's gaze shifted to Kyle, then back to Elena. "Where's the Alpha King?" "Fighting," Elena said. There are too many of them. They broke through the eastern gate. Marin's jaw tightened. How many? I don't know. Dozens. Maybe more. One of the women nearby let out a choked sob. A child started crying. Marin raised a hand, her voice sharp. Quiet. All of you. The room fell silent. Marin turned to Elena. You should have stayed hidden. If Drake finds out you're here, he already knows, Elena said. That's why he came. Marin's eyes narrowed. You're certain? Yes. Then you've put everyone in this fortress at risk. The accusation hit like a fist. Elena's throat tightened. I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask for any of this. And yet here you are, Marin said coldly. A human who stumbled into our territory and brought an army to our door. That's not fair. Fair? Marin stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This fortress has stood for 200 years. Darius has defended it against every challenge, every threat, every war. And now, because of you, we're under siege by a pack of rogues led by a vindictive alpha who wants to prove a point. Elena's hands curled into fists. I warned him. I told him Drake was coming. And what good did that do? Marin shot back. We're still under attack. People are still dying. And for what? To protect a human who means nothing to this pack? The words cut deep. Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Kael stepped between them. He looked up at Marin with those wide, amber eyes, his small body trembling with barely controlled emotion. And then, for the first time in 2 years, he spoke. She means something to me. The room went silent. Everyone stared at the boy. Lyra with shock, the other women with disbelief, Marin with something that looked almost like pain. Kael's voice was small and quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. She saved me, he continued, his eyes never leaving Marin's, and I won't let you hurt her. Marin's expression cracked. She looked at the boy for a long, heavy moment. Then she turned away without another word and walked to the far side of the chamber. Elena knelt down in front of Kael, her chest tight. Kael, he threw his arms around her neck and buried his face in her shoulder. Elena held him close, her eyes burning. It's okay, she whispered. I'm not going anywhere. But even as she said the words, she knew they might be a lie. The battle raged for hours. Elena sat in the corner of the chamber with Kael curled against her side, listening to the muffled sounds of combat echoing through the stone walls. Every crash, every howl, every scream made her flinch. She didn't know what was happening up there, didn't know if Darius was winning or losing, didn't know if they'd survive the night. All she could do was wait and pray. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds began to fade. The howls grew quieter. The crashes stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. Elena's heart pounded. Then the iron door creaked open. Everyone in the chamber tensed. Darius stepped inside. He was covered in blood, his own and others', his clothes torn, his face bruised and swollen. But he was alive. Relief flooded through Elena like a wave. Darius's gaze swept across the room, landing on Kael. Everyone stays here until we've cleared the fortress. No one leaves this chamber. Understood? The women nodded. Darius turned to leave. Wait, Elena said, standing. Is it over? Darius paused, his hand on the door. For now. What does that mean? Darius looked back at her, his amber eyes hard. It means we drove them back. But Drake escaped, and he'll be back. Elena's stomach dropped. How do you know? Because he left a message. Darius stepped aside, revealing a blood-stained piece of paper nailed to the door. Elena crossed the room and read it. The words were scrawled in jagged handwriting, but the meaning was clear. Return what's mine, or I'll burn your fortress to the ground. Elena's breath caught. He's talking about you, Darius said quietly. Elena swallowed hard. What are you going to do? Darius was silent for a long moment. Then he said, That depends on you, Chun. They met in the war room an hour later. Darius, Marin, Elena, and 3 of Darius's senior commanders. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Darius stood at the head of the table, his hands braced on the surface, his gaze fixed on the map in front of him. Drake lost 40 wolves tonight. We lost 12. One of the commanders, a grizzled man with a scar across his throat, spoke. He'll regroup, gather more rogues, come back stronger. Which gives us maybe a week, another commander said. 2 at most. Unless we give him what he wants, Marin said. All eyes turned to Elena. She stood near the door, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. You want to hand me over, Elena said. I want to protect this pack, Marin replied. And if that means sacrificing one human to save hundreds of wolves, then yes. I think it's a fair trade. You're talking about murder, Elena said. I'm talking about survival. Darius slammed his hand on the table. Enough. The room fell silent. Darius straightened, his gaze sweeping across the gathered wolves. Elena stays. Marin's eyes flashed. Alpha King. She stays, Darius repeated, his voice hard as iron. Drake doesn't get to dictate terms. He attacked my fortress. He killed my wolves, and he will answer for it. And if he comes back? Marin demanded. If he brings an even larger army, how many more will we lose before you're satisfied? Darius's jaw tightened. As many as it takes. That's not leadership, Marin said. That's pride. Then call it pride, Darius shot back. But I will not bend to threats, and I will not sacrifice an innocent to appease a coward. Marin stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and walked out of the room. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Darius dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Leave us. They obeyed. When the door closed, Darius turned to Elena. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Marin's right. I'm not worth a war. That's not your decision to make, Darius said. Then whose decision is it? Mine. Darius crossed to the window and stared out at the smoke-stained sky. Kael spoke today, for the first time in 2 years. Do you know what that means? Elena's throat tightened. It means he's healing. It means you're helping him heal, Darius said. And I won't take that away from him. Not for Drake. Not for anyone. Elena stepped closer. But what if it costs you everything? Darius looked at her, his amber eyes steady. Then it costs me everything. The words hung in the air between them. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was making a mistake. But she couldn't. Because for the first time since washing up on the riverbank, someone was choosing her. Not because she was useful, not because she was strong, but because she mattered. Tet. That night, Elena stood on the battlements, staring out at the forest beyond the walls. The air was cold and sharp, the sky heavy with clouds. Snow drifted down in silence. Somewhere out there, Drake was regrouping, planning, waiting. You shouldn't be out here alone. Elena turned. Darius stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. I needed air, Elena said. Darius joined her at the wall, his gaze fixed on the distant tree line. You're thinking about leaving. It wasn't a question. Elena didn't deny it. If I leave, Drake will follow, and your pack will be safe. You don't know that. I know Drake, Elena said. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants. And what he wants is me. Darius was silent for a long moment. Then he said, What do you want? Elena blinked. What? You've spent your whole life doing what other people wanted, Darius said. Drake wanted you gone. Kael wanted you to stay. I want you protected. But what do you want? Elena's breath caught. No one had ever asked her that before. I want... Her voice faltered. I want to stop running. Darius looked at her, his amber eyes steady. Then don't. Elena met his gaze. It's not that simple. It is, Darius said. You run or you fight. Those are your options. Choose. Elena's chest tightened. Before she could respond, a shout erupted from the watchtower. Both of them turned. A figure was approaching the gates, alone, unarmed, walking slowly through the snow. Darius's eyes narrowed. Stay here. He descended the stairs and crossed the courtyard, Elena right behind him despite his order. The gates opened, and Drake Holloway stepped inside. He looked exactly as Elena remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, with cold gray eyes and a face carved from stone. His clothes were dirty and torn, his hands covered in dried blood, but he walked like a king entering his own castle, his expression utterly confident. Darius stopped a few feet away, his body coiled and ready. "You have 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't kill you where you stand." Drake smiled. "Because I'm here to negotiate." "There's nothing to negotiate." "I think there is." Drake's gaze shifted to Elena, his smile widening. "Hello, Elena. I have to admit I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd survive the river." Elena's hands curled into fists. "You want her back," Darius said flatly. "The answer is no." "I'm not asking," Drake said. "I'm offering a trade." Darius's eyes flashed. "I don't make deals with cowards who attack in the night." "Then you'll make a deal with a pack that attacks in the daylight." Drake reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the ground between them. Darius didn't move. Elena picked it up. It was a letter, signed by 5 different alphas. Her blood ran cold. "What is this?" she whispered. "A coalition," Drake said. 5 packs, all of whom have agreed to stand with me against the Obsidian Fortress. If you don't return Elena within 3 days, we attack together. And this time you won't win." Darius's expression didn't change. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Drake gestured to the letter. "Those are real signatures, real alphas, real armies. You're strong, Voss, but you're not strong enough to fight 5 packs at once." Silence fell. Elena's heart pounded. Drake stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Give me the girl, and this ends. Keep her, and everyone in this fortress dies." Darius stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he said, "Get out of my territory." Drake's smile faded. "You're making a mistake." "The only mistake I made was letting you leave alive tonight," Darius said. "If you're still standing here in 5 seconds, I'll correct it." Drake's jaw tightened. He turned and walked toward the gates. But as he passed Elena, he leaned in and whispered, "This isn't over." Then he was gone. The gates closed behind him. Elena stood frozen, the letter still clutched in her hand. Darius turned to her, his expression grim. "We have 3 days." "To do what?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. Darius's eyes burned. "To prepare for war." The war room became Elena's prison for the next 2 days. She sat at the long table, surrounded by maps and battle plans, watching Darius and his commanders argue strategy while the clock ticked down toward the inevitable. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with tension and the unspoken knowledge that they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. "We fortify the northern wall," one commander said, jabbing his finger at the map. "Force them to attack from the east where the terrain favors us." "That assumes they attack all at once," another countered. "What if they split their forces, hit us from 3 sides simultaneously?" "Then we're dead," Marin said bluntly. 5 packs is too many, even for us." Darius stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Neither had Elena. They'd all been running on adrenaline and desperation, searching for an answer that didn't exist. "We need reinforcements," one of the younger commanders said. "Call in the allied packs. Summon the northern clans." "There isn't time," Darius said, "and most of our allies are neutral. They won't risk their own packs for a fight that isn't theirs." "Then what do we do?" the commander asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. Silence fell. Elena stared at the map, her mind racing. 5 packs. Hundreds of wolves. All converging on the Obsidian Fortress because Drake had convinced them that Darius was harboring stolen property. Her. She was the reason this war was happening, and she was the only one who could stop it. "What if we don't fight them?" Elena said. Every head in the room turned toward her. Darius's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Elena stood, her heart pounding. "Drake's coalition is built on a lie. He told those alphas that you stole something from him, that you're harboring a fugitive. But what if we prove he's lying?" "How?" Marin demanded. "By handing you over?" "No," Elena said. "By exposing the truth, in front of everyone." Darius tilted his head slightly. "You want a trial?" "Not a trial," Elena said. "A challenge. Wolf law states that disputes between alphas can be settled through single combat. Drake challenged your authority by attacking your fortress. Challenge him back. Make him fight you. And when he loses, his coalition falls apart. The room erupted. That's insane, one commander said. It'll never work, another added. Drake won't accept. He will, Elena said, her voice rising, because if he refuses, he'll look weak in front of the other alphas. And weakness is the one thing Drake can't afford. Marin leaned forward, her eyes sharp. And what happens when Darius kills him? The other 4 packs will still want blood. Not if we give them something better, Elena said. Not if we give them the truth. Darius studied her in silence. Then he said, What truth? Elena took a breath. Drake didn't throw me off that cliff because I couldn't shift. He threw me off because I was a reminder of his failure. He raised a human girl and couldn't turn her into a wolf. That made him look weak. And instead of admitting his mistake, he tried to erase it. How does that help us? Marin asked. Because it proves Drake is a liar, Elena said. And if he's lying about me, what else is he lying about? The other alphas don't trust him. They're working with him because they think you're the bigger threat. But if we show them who Drake really is, a coward who attacks the defenseless and hides behind coalitions, they'll turn on him. The room fell silent. Darius's gaze never left Elena's face. You're asking me to gamble everything on the chance that Drake's allies will abandon him. I'm asking you to give them a reason to, Elena said. Right now, they see you as a tyrant protecting stolen property. Show them the truth. Show them that Drake is the real villain, and watch his coalition crumble. One of the commanders shook his head. It's too risky. Everything is risky, Elena said. But fighting 5 packs head-on is suicide. This way, we only have to beat one. Darius was silent for a long moment, his amber eyes burning with something Elena couldn't name. Then he turned to his commanders. Send a message to Drake. Tell him I accept his terms, on one condition. He faces me in single combat before the gathered packs. Winner takes all. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. And if he refuses? Marin asked. Darius's smile was cold. Then we make sure everyone knows why. Okay. The message was sent at dawn. Drake's reply came 3 hours later. He accepted. The challenge would take place at sunset the following day on neutral ground, a clearing at the base of the mountains where pack law dictated all formal disputes be settled. The 5 allied alphas would witness the fight. The winner would claim the disputed territory and the contested prize. Elena. The fortress erupted into preparation. Warriors sharpened weapons. Scouts mapped the terrain. Healers stockpiled supplies. Everyone moved with grim purpose, their faces set with the knowledge that this fight would determine their future. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about what she'd set in motion. She'd convinced Darius to gamble everything on a single fight, and if he lost, it was her fault. She found Kael in the greenhouse, sitting among the seedlings he'd planted weeks ago. The plants had grown, small green shoots pushing through the soil, reaching toward the light. Elena sat down beside him. Hey. Kael looked up at her, his amber eyes searching her face. Are you scared? Elena asked. Kael nodded. Me too, Elena said. But your father is the strongest alpha I've ever seen. He's going to win. Kael's small hand found hers. What if he doesn't? Elena's throat tightened. Then we'll figure it out. Together. Kael leaned against her, his voice barely a whisper. I don't want you to leave. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said, though the words felt like a lie. Because the truth was, she didn't know what would happen tomorrow. All she knew was that she'd started this, and she had to see it through. That night, Elena stood on the battlements again, staring out at the darkness. The forest beyond the walls was silent and still, but she could feel the weight of what was coming pressing down on her like a physical force. Tomorrow, everything would change. You should be resting. Elena turned. Darius stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. I can't sleep, Elena said. Darius joined her at the wall, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Neither can I. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Elena said, I'm sorry. Darius looked at her. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you fight a war that isn't yours. This war became mine the moment Drake crossed my border, Darius said. You didn't start it. You just gave me a way to end it. Elena swallowed hard. What if I'm wrong? What if the other alphas don't turn on him? Then we fight, Darius said simply. And we keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for. Elena's chest tightened. You'd really risk everything for me? Darius was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for Kael, for this pack, for everyone who's ever been thrown away and told they don't matter. Elena's breath caught. You survived the river, Darius continued. You survived Drake. You survived everything this world threw at you. And now you're standing here refusing to run, refusing to give up. That's not weakness. That's strength. Elena looked up at him, her eyes burning. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel it, Darius said. You just have to be it. The words settled over her like a weight and a promise. Darius turned to leave, then paused. Get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow, we show them who we are. The clearing at the base of the mountains was a natural amphitheater, a wide, flat expanse of stone surrounded by towering pines and jagged cliffs. By the time Elena arrived with Darius and his warriors, it was already packed with wolves, hundreds of them. The 5 allied packs had come in full force, their alphas standing at the edge of the clearing with their enforcers flanking them. Elena recognized some of them from council gatherings she'd attended with Drake, hardened leaders with reputations built on blood and brutality. And in the center of the clearing, waiting with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face, was Drake. He looked confident, relaxed, like he'd already won. Darius dismounted from his horse and strode forward, his presence commanding immediate silence. The 2 alphas faced each other across the clearing. I didn't think you'd actually come, Drake said. I don't run from cowards, Darius replied. Drake's smirk widened. Big words from a man who's about to lose everything. We'll see. One of the allied alphas, a grizzled man with a scar bisecting his face, stepped forward. The terms have been agreed upon. Single combat, no interference. The fight ends when one of you yields or dies. I won't yield, Darius said. Neither will I, Drake said. The scarred alpha nodded. Then let's begin. The gathered wolves formed a circle around the clearing, their eyes bright with anticipation. Elena stood at the edge with Kael clutching her hand, her heart hammering in her chest. Darius began to strip off his shirt, revealing the powerful muscles and scars that marked him as a warrior. Drake did the same. And then, without warning, both men shifted. The transformation was instantaneous, bones cracking, fur rippling, bodies expanding and reforming in seconds. Where 2 men had stood, there were now 2 massive wolves. Darius was larger, a black-furred beast with amber eyes that burned like fire. Drake was leaner, gray-furred and scarred, his yellow eyes gleaming with malice. They circled each other slowly, growling low in their throats. And then Drake lunged. The fight was brutal. Drake came in fast and vicious, his jaws snapping at Darius's throat, his claws raking across the black wolf's side. Darius twisted and countered, his teeth sinking into Drake's shoulder, his weight slamming the gray wolf into the ground. They broke apart and circled again, both bleeding, both breathing hard. Drake feinted left, then struck right, catching Darius across the face with a vicious swipe that tore through fur and flesh. Blood sprayed across the stone. Darius didn't flinch. He lunged forward with a roar that shook the clearing and drove Drake backward, his jaws closing around the gray wolf's leg. There was a sickening crack. Drake yelped and twisted free, limping now, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. But Darius didn't give him time to recover. He attacked again, relentless and precise, driving Drake across the clearing with a series of devastating strikes. Teeth met flesh, claws tore through muscle. Blood pooled on the stone. The gathered wolves watched in silence. Elena could barely breathe. Drake was losing, and he knew it. With a desperate snarl, Drake shifted back into human form mid-fight, a move that broke the rules but gave him a split-second advantage. He grabbed a rock from the ground and smashed it into Darius's skull. Darius staggered, momentarily stunned. Drake shifted back into wolf form and lunged for the kill, but Darius was faster. He twisted at the last second, caught Drake by the throat, and slammed him into the ground with bone-crushing force. Drake thrashed, but Darius held him pinned, his jaws tightening, his amber eyes locked on the gray wolf's face. The clearing went silent. Drake's struggles weakened, his breathing slowed, his yellow eyes flickered with fear, and then, finally, he shifted back into human form, I yield, he gasped. Darius released him and stepped back, shifting into human form as well. Drake collapsed onto the stone, gasping for air, his body broken and bleeding. The scarred Alpha stepped forward. The challenge is decided. Alpha King Darius Voss is the victor. A murmur rippled through the gathered wolves. Darius turned to face the allied Alphas, his voice carrying across the clearing. Drake Holloway attacked my fortress under false pretenses. He claimed I stole from him. But the truth is, he threw a defenseless girl into a river to hide his own weakness. And when she survived, he tried to use you to finish what he started. The allied Alphas exchanged glances. Elena Vale belongs to no one, Darius continued. She washed up on my land. She survived by her own strength, and by wolf law that makes her mine to protect, not his to reclaim. Drake struggled to sit up, his face twisted with rage. She's human. She has no right. She has every right, Darius cut him off. Because she survived, and survival is the only law that matters. One of the allied Alphas, a woman with silver-streaked hair, stepped forward. If what you say is true, then Drake lied to us. He told us you were harboring stolen property. I lied to no one, Drake spat. She belongs to my pack. I raised her. You tried to kill her, Darius said coldly. And now you're trying to use these Alphas to finish the job because you're too weak to do it yourself. The silver-haired Alpha's eyes narrowed. Is this true? Drake said nothing. The silence was damning. The silver-haired Alpha turned to her companions. We were manipulated. Drake used our desire to challenge the Obsidian Fortress to settle a personal vendetta. The other Alphas nodded slowly, their expressions hardening. Drake's face went pale. Wait, the coalition is dissolved, the silver-haired Alpha said. Drake Holloway, you are stripped of your rank and your territory. You will leave these lands as a rogue. If you return, you will be executed. Drake's mouth opened, but no words came out. The gathered wolves turned away from him, one by one, until he was alone in the center of the clearing. Broken. Defeated. Forgotten. Darius crossed to where Elena stood and placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over. Elena's knees nearly gave out. We won. You won, Darius said. This was your plan, your strategy. You saved this pack. Elena looked up at him, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. I couldn't have done it without you. Darius's expression softened. Neither of us could have done it alone. Kael broke free from Elena's grip and ran to his father, throwing his arms around Darius's leg. Darius lifted the boy into his arms, holding him close. And for the first time since Elena had arrived at the Obsidian Fortress, she saw the Alpha King smile. The journey back to the fortress was quiet. The warriors rode in formation, their heads high, their spirits lifted by the victory. The allied packs had dispersed peacefully, their alliance with Drake shattered beyond repair. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the world around her, but inside her. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, powerless, a burden. But today, she'd stood before 5 Alphas and proven them all wrong. She'd survived, and she'd won. When they reached the fortress, the gates opened to cheers and celebration. Wolves lined the courtyard, shouting Darius's name, their voices echoing off the stone walls. But when Elena dismounted, the cheers didn't stop. They grew louder. She looked around, confused, and then she saw them, wolves bowing their heads as she passed, acknowledging her, respecting her. Lyra ran forward and threw her arms around Elena, tears streaming down her face. You did it. You saved us. Elena hugged her back, overwhelmed. Marin approached slowly, her expression unreadable. She stopped in front of Elena and studied her for a long moment. Then she inclined her head. You have my respect, Elena Vale, and my apology. Elena's throat tightened. You were protecting your pack. I understand. Marin's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. You're one of us now, whether you like it or not. Elena didn't know what to say. Darius appeared beside her, his hand resting on Kael's shoulder. The council wants to hold a formal ceremony to recognize what you've done. Elena shook her head. I don't need recognition. I just need to know we're safe. We are, Darius said, because of you. Kael tugged on Elena's hand, his amber eyes bright. Does this mean you're staying? Elena knelt down and looked him in the eye. If you'll have me. Kale's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen. And in that moment, Elena knew. She was home. Viet lai cho tôi part bon du 6.500 từ 10 giờ 17 phút 2 trên 2, part bon. The war room became Elena's prison for the next 2 days. She sat at the long table surrounded by maps and battle plans, watching Darius and his commanders argue strategy while the clock ticked down toward the inevitable. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with tension and the unspoken knowledge that they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. "We fortify the northern wall," one commander said, jabbing his finger at the map. "Force them to attack from the east where the terrain favors us." "That assumes they attack all at once," another countered. "What if they split their forces? Hit us from 3 sides simultaneously?" "Then we're dead," Marin said bluntly. 5 packs is too many, even for us. Darius stood at the head of the table, his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Neither had Elena. They'd all been running on adrenaline and desperation, searching for an answer that didn't exist. "We need reinforcements," one of the younger commanders said. "Call in the allied packs. Summon the northern clans." "There isn't time," Darius said. "And most of our allies are neutral. They won't risk their own packs for a fight that isn't theirs." "Then what do we do?" the commander asked, frustration bleeding into his voice. Silence fell. Elena stared at the map, her mind racing. She'd been quiet for hours, listening, observing, trying to piece together a solution from fragments of conversations and half-formed ideas. But every strategy the commanders proposed had the same fatal flaw. They were designed to survive, not to win. And survival wasn't enough. Not anymore. 5 packs. Hundreds of wolves. All converging on the obsidian fortress because Drake had convinced them that Darius was harboring stolen property. Her. She was the reason this war was happening, and she was the only one who could stop it. "What if we don't fight them?" Elena said. Every head in the room turned toward her. Darius's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Elena stood, her heart pounding. "Drake's coalition is built on a lie. He told those alphas that you stole something from him, that you're harboring a fugitive. But what if we prove he's lying?" "How?" Marin demanded. "By handing you over." "No," Elena said. "By exposing the truth, in front of everyone." Darius tilted his head slightly. "You want a trial?" "Not a trial," Elena said. "A challenge. Wolf law states that disputes between alphas can be settled through single combat. Drake challenged your authority by attacking your fortress. Challenge him back. Make him fight you. And when he loses, his coalition falls apart." The room erupted. "That's insane," one commander said. "It'll never work," another added. "Drake won't accept." "He will," Elena said, her voice rising above the chaos. "Because if he refuses, he'll look weak in front of the other alphas, and weakness is the one thing Drake can't afford." Marin leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "And what happens when Darius kills him? The other 4 packs will still want blood." "Not if we give them something better," Elena said. "Not if we give them the truth." Darius studied her in silence, his amber eyes burning with intensity. "What truth?" Elena took a breath, steadying herself. "Drake didn't throw me off that cliff because I couldn't shift. He threw me off because I was a reminder of his failure. He raised a human girl and couldn't turn her into a wolf. That made him look weak. And instead of admitting his mistake, he tried to erase it. He tried to erase me." "How does that help us?" Marin asked, her tone skeptical. "Because it proves Drake is a liar," Elena said. "And if he's lying about me, what else is he lying about? The other alphas don't trust him. They're working with him because they think you're the bigger threat. But if we show them who Drake really is, a coward who attacks the defenseless and hides behind coalitions, they'll turn on him." The room fell silent. Darius's gaze never left Elena's face. "You're asking me to gamble everything on the chance that Drake's allies will abandon him." "I'm asking you to give them a reason to," Elena said. "Right now they see you as a tyrant protecting stolen property. Show them the truth. Show them that Drake is the real villain, and watch his coalition crumble." One of the commanders shook his head. "It's too risky. If the other alphas don't believe us." "Then we're in the same position we're in now," Elena interrupted. Except instead of fighting 5 packs at once, we only have to beat one. And Darius can beat Drake. I've seen him fight. Drake doesn't stand a chance.
You're certain about this? Darius asked quietly. Elena met his gaze. I'm certain that fighting a war we can't win is suicide. This way, we have a chance. A real chance. Darius was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he considered her words. The entire room held its breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, he turned to his commanders. Send a message to Drake. Tell him I accept his terms. On one condition. He faces me in single combat before the gathered packs.
Winner takes all. The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Alpha King, one of them started. If this goes wrong, we were dead anyway, Darius said flatly. At least this way we die fighting on our own terms. Marin stood slowly, her expression unreadable. And if he refuses the challenge? Darius's smile was cold and sharp. Then we make sure everyone knows why. We spread the word that Drake Holloway is too much of a coward to face me alone, that he needs 4 other packs to hide behind. By the time we're done, his reputation will be destroyed. Marin considered this, then nodded. It might work. It will work, Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly. Darius looked at her, and something in his expression softened. You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Elena said. For the first time in days, Darius almost smiled. The message was sent at dawn. Drake's reply came 3 hours later. He accepted. The challenge would take place at sunset the following day, on neutral ground, a clearing at the base of the mountains where pack law dictated all formal disputes be settled. The 5 allied alphas would witness the fight. The winner would claim the disputed territory and the contested prize. Elena. The fortress erupted into preparation. Warriors sharpened weapons and drilled formations, even though the combat would be single-handed. Scouts mapped the terrain around the neutral ground, looking for ambush points and escape routes. Healers stockpiled supplies, bandages, salves, herbs for pain and infection. Everyone moved with grim purpose, their faces set with the knowledge that this fight would determine their future. But Elena couldn't stop thinking about what she'd set in motion. She'd convinced Darius to gamble everything on a single fight, and if he lost, it was her fault. She found Kyle in the greenhouse, sitting among the seedlings he'd planted weeks ago. The plants had grown, small green shoots pushing through the soil, reaching toward the light filtering through the glass ceiling. Elena sat down beside him on the wooden bench. Hey. Kyle looked up at her, his amber eyes searching her face with an intensity that was heartbreaking in someone so young. Are you scared? Elena asked softly. Kale nodded, his small hands gripping the edge of the bench. Me too, Elena admitted. But your father is the strongest alpha I've ever seen. He's going to win. Kyle's small hand found hers, his fingers cold and trembling. What if he doesn't? Elena's throat tightened. The question was the same one that had been haunting her since the moment Darius accepted the challenge. Then we'll figure it out. Together. Kale leaned against her, his voice barely a whisper. I don't want you to leave. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said, wrapping her arm around his small shoulders. But even as she said the words, they felt hollow. Because the truth was, she didn't know what would happen tomorrow. All she knew was that she'd started this, and she had to see it through. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the quiet growth of new life. Elena found herself thinking about the girl she'd been when she washed up on that riverbank. Broken, freezing, convinced she was going to die. That girl would never have believed she'd end up here, in a fortress full of wolves, helping to plan a war. Elena? Kale's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Yes? If my father wins, will you stay forever? Elena's chest ached. Do you want me to? Kale nodded vigorously, his black hair falling into his eyes. You make him smile. He never smiled before you came. Not since Mama died. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She hadn't realized that her presence had affected Darius that way. She'd been so focused on survival, on proving she wasn't a burden, that she hadn't noticed the small changes in the Alpha King, the way his expression softened when Kyle laughed, the way he stood a little straighter when she walked into a room. Then I'll stay,
Elena said. I promise.
Kale wrapped his arms around her neck and held on tight. That night, Elena stood on the battlements again, staring out at the darkness beyond the fortress walls. The forest was silent and still, but she could feel the weight of what was coming pressing down on her like a physical force. Tomorrow, everything would change. Either Darius would win and they'd be safe, or he'd lose and everything they'd built would crumble. You should be resting. Elena turned. Darius stood a few feet away, dressed in dark training clothes, his hands in his pockets. His expression was unreadable in the dim light. I can't sleep, Elena said. Darius joined her at the wall, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Neither can I. They stood in silence for a moment, the cold wind whipping around them. Then Elena said, I'm sorry. Darius looked at her, his amber eyes questioning. For what? For dragging you into this. For making you fight a war that isn't yours. This war became mine the moment Drake crossed my border, Darius said firmly. You didn't start it. You just gave me a way to end it. Elena swallowed hard. What if I'm wrong? What if the other alphas don't turn on him? What if they see through the plan and attack anyway? Then we fight, Darius said simply, and we keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for. Elena's chest tightened. You'd really risk everything for me? Darius was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he chose his words carefully. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for Kael, for this pack, for everyone who's ever been thrown away and told they don't matter. Elena's breath caught. You survived the river, Darius continued, his voice low and intense. You survived Drake. You survived everything this world threw at you. And now you're standing here, refusing to run, refusing to give up, refusing to let anyone tell you you're worthless. That's not weakness. That's strength. Elena looked up at him, her eyes burning with unshed tears. I don't feel strong. You don't have to feel it, Darius said, holding her gaze. You just have to be it. The words settled over her like a weight and a promise. Elena wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that he'd changed her life, that he'd given her something to fight for when she had nothing left. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just nodded. Darius reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture brief but weighted with meaning. Get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow, we show them who we are. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing against the stone. Elena stood alone on the battlements for a long time, staring out at the darkness and trying to quiet the storm of emotions raging inside her. Tomorrow would either be the beginning of something new or the end of everything. The clearing at the base of the mountains was a natural amphitheater, a wide, flat expanse of stone surrounded by towering pines and jagged cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels. By the time Elena arrived with Darius and his warriors, it was already packed with wolves. Hundreds of them. The 5 allied packs had come in full force, their alphas standing at the edge of the clearing with their enforcers flanking them like walls of muscle and menace. Elena recognized some of them from council gatherings she'd attended with Drake, hardened leaders with reputations built on blood and brutality. And in the center of the clearing, waiting with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face, was Drake. He looked confident, relaxed, like he'd already won. The sight of him made Elena's stomach turn. This was the man who'd raised her, who'd promised to protect her, who'd thrown her off a cliff like she was garbage. And now he stood there, surrounded by allies, convinced that he was about to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Darius dismounted from his horse and strode forward, his presence commanding immediate silence. The gathered wolves parted for him like water, their eyes tracking his every movement. The 2 alphas faced each other across the clearing. I didn't think you'd actually come, Drake said, his voice carrying across the stone. I thought you'd send her out with an apology and beg for mercy. I don't beg, Darius replied, his tone flat and cold, and I don't negotiate with cowards. Drake's smirk widened. Big words from a man who's about to lose everything. We'll see. One of the allied alphas, a grizzled man with a scar bisecting his face from forehead to chin, stepped forward. He raised his hand, commanding points from the gathered wolves. The terms have been agreed upon, the scarred alpha announced, his voice rough as gravel. Single combat between Alpha King Darius Voss and Alpha Drake Holloway. No interference from either pack, no weapons. The fight ends when one of you yields or dies. These are the laws that bind us. Do you both accept? I accept, Darius said. I accept, Drake echoed, his yellow eyes gleaming. The scarred Alpha nodded. Then let the challenge begin. The gathered wolves formed a circle around the clearing, their eyes bright with anticipation. This was the old way. The way disputes had been settled for thousands of years. Blood and bone and the will to survive. Elena stood at the edge with Kyle clutching her hand, her heart hammering in her chest. Lyra stood beside them, her face pale but determined. He's going to win, Lyra whispered. He has to. Elena couldn't speak. She could only watch. Darius began to strip off his shirt, revealing the powerful muscles and scars that marked him as a warrior. His body was a map of battles won and enemies defeated, each scar a testament to his strength. Drake did the same, his own body lean and scarred but lacking the raw power that radiated from Darius. And then, without warning, both men shifted. The transformation was instantaneous, bones cracking and reforming, fur rippling across skin, bodies expanding and reshaping in seconds. Where two men had stood, there were now two massive wolves. Darius was larger, a black-furred beast with amber eyes that burned like fire, his shoulders broad and powerful, his presence dominating the clearing. Drake was leaner, gray-furred and scarred, his yellow eyes gleaming with malice and desperation. They circled each other slowly, paws scraping against stone, growls rumbling low in their throats. The clearing held its breath, and then Drake lunged. The fight was brutal from the first second. Drake came in fast and vicious, his jaws snapping at Darius's throat, his claws raking across the black wolf's side. Darius twisted with inhuman speed and countered, his teeth sinking into Drake's shoulder, his weight slamming the gray wolf into the ground with bone-crushing force. They broke apart and circled again, both bleeding, both breathing hard, steam rising from their bodies in the cold air. Drake feinted left, then struck right, catching Darius across the face with a vicious swipe that tore through fur and flesh. Blood sprayed across the stone, dark and gleaming. Darius didn't flinch. He lunged forward with a roar that shook the clearing and drove Drake backward, his jaws closing around the gray wolf's leg. There was a sickening crack, the sound of bone breaking. Drake yelped and twisted free, limping now, his yellow eyes blazing with fury and pain. But Darius didn't give him time to recover. He attacked again, relentless and precise, driving Drake across the clearing with a series of devastating strikes. Teeth met flesh. Claws tore through muscle. Blood pooled on the stone, spreading in dark puddles. The gathered wolves watched in absolute silence, transfixed by the violence unfolding before them. Elena could barely breathe, her nails dug into her palms. Beside her, Kyle's hand trembled in hers. Drake was losing, and he knew it. With a desperate snarl, Drake shifted back into human form mid-fight, a move that broke the unspoken rules of the challenge but gave him a split-second advantage. He grabbed a rock from the ground and smashed it into Darius's skull with all his strength. Darius staggered, momentarily stunned, blood streaming down the side of his head. The gathered wolves gasped. Several moved forward, but the scarred Alpha raised his hand, stopping them. "Let them finish," he commanded. Drake shifted back into wolf form and lunged for the kill, his jaws aimed at Darius's exposed throat. But Darius was faster. Even dazed, even bleeding, he twisted at the last second, caught Drake by the throat, and slammed him into the ground with enough force to crack the stone beneath them. Drake thrashed, his claws scrabbling desperately, but Darius held him pinned, his jaws tightening around the gray wolf's throat. His amber eyes locked on Drake's face. The clearing went absolutely silent. Drake's struggles weakened. His breathing became labored, rasping. His yellow eyes flickered with something Elena had never seen there before. Fear. And then, finally, he shifted back into human form, gasping and broken. "I yield," Drake choked out, blood bubbling from his lips. Darius released him and stepped back, shifting into human form as well. Blood ran down his face and chest, but he stood tall, unbroken. The scarred Alpha stepped forward, his expression grave. "The challenge is decided. Alpha King Darius Voss is the victor." A murmur rippled through the gathered wolves. growing into a roar of approval from Darius's pack. But Darius raised his hand, silencing them. He turned to face the 5 allied alphas, his voice carrying across the clearing. Drake Holloway attacked my fortress under false pretenses. He claimed I stole from him, but the truth is, he threw a defenseless girl into a river to hide his own weakness. And when she survived, he tried to use you, all of you, to finish what he started. The allied alphas exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. Elena Vale belongs to no one, Darius continued, his voice ringing with authority. She washed up on my land. She survived by her own strength. And by wolf law, that makes her mine to protect, not his to reclaim. Drake struggled to sit up, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. She's human. She has no right. She has every right, Darius cut him off, his voice like thunder. Because she survived, and survival is the only law that matters. One of the allied alphas, a woman with silver-streaked hair and cold blue eyes, stepped forward. Her pack markings identified her as Alpha Morgana of the Northern Reaches, one of the most respected leaders on the continent. If what you say is true, Alpha Morgana said slowly, then Drake lied to us. He told us you were harboring stolen property, that you were violating pack law. I lied to no one, Drake spat, dragging himself to his feet. She belongs to my pack. I raised her. I gave her everything. You tried to kill her, Darius said coldly. And now you're trying to use these alphas to finish the job because you're too weak to do it yourself. Alpha Morgana's eyes narrowed dangerously. Is this true, Drake? Did you attempt to execute this girl without a formal trial? Drake hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. The silver-haired alpha's expression turned to ice. You manipulated us. You used our desire to challenge the Obsidian Fortress to settle a personal vendetta. The other allied alphas nodded slowly, their faces hardening with realization and anger. Wait, Drake started, panic creeping into his voice. The coalition is dissolved, Alpha Morgana declared, her voice ringing with finality. Drake Holloway, you are stripped of your rank and your territory for dishonoring pack law and manipulating allied packs for personal gain. You will leave these lands as a rogue. If you return, you will be executed. Drake's face went white. You can't. It's done, another alpha said flatly. The gathered wolves turned away from Drake, one by one, until he was alone in the center of the clearing, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses to his downfall. Broken, defeated, forgotten. Darius crossed to where Elena stood and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle despite the blood covering his hands. It's over. Elena's knees nearly gave out, relief flooding through her in waves. We won. You won, Darius said, his amber eyes intense. This was your plan, your strategy. You saved this pack. Elena looked up at him, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. I couldn't have done it without you. Darius's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. Neither of us could have done it alone. Kyle broke free from Elena's grip and ran to his father, throwing his arms around Darius's leg with desperate strength. Darius lifted the boy into his arms, holding him close, and for the first time since Elena had arrived at the Obsidian Fortress, she saw the Alpha King truly smile. Not the cold, calculated expression he wore in court, but something genuine and warm. Alpha Morgana approached them, her expression thoughtful. That was well played, Voss. Both the fight and the politics. Darius inclined his head. Thank you, Alpha Morgana. The silver-haired woman's gaze shifted to Elena, studying her with sharp intelligence. You're the human who started all this? Elena nodded, her throat tight. You're braver than most wolves I know, Alpha Morgana said. To stand before 5 allied packs and gamble everything on the truth, that takes courage. Or desperation, Elena said quietly. Alpha Morgana's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Sometimes they're the same thing. She turned back to Darius. The Northern Reaches will remember this day. You have our respect. She walked away, her pack following behind her. One by one, the other allied alphas approached, offering brief words of acknowledgement before departing with their wolves. Within an hour, the clearing was nearly empty, the massive gathering dispersing as quickly as it had formed. Only Drake remained, sitting alone on the blood-stained stone, his body broken and his spirit shattered. Darius looked down at him with an expression devoid of pity. You have until sunset to leave my territory. After that, you're fair game for my hunters. Drake didn't respond. He just sat there, staring at nothing. Darius turned away and walked toward the horses, Kyle still in his arms, Elena at his side. What? The journey back to the fortress was quiet but electric with unspoken emotion. The warriors rode in tight formation, their heads high, their spirits lifted by the victory. Word would spread quickly. The Alpha King had defeated a coalition of 5 packs through strength and strategy, and the human who'd washed up in his territory had been the architect of it all. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the world around her, but inside her. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, powerless, a burden to be discarded. But today, she'd stood before the most powerful alphas on the continent and proven them all wrong. She'd survived, and she'd won. When they reached the fortress, the gates opened to thunderous cheers and celebration. Wolves lined the courtyard, shouting Darius's name, their voices echoing off the stone walls in waves of jubilation. But when Elena dismounted from her horse, something unexpected happened. The cheers didn't stop. They grew louder. She looked around, confused, and realized with shock that some of the wolves were cheering for her. Warriors she'd never spoken to nodded in respect. Women she'd only seen from a distance smiled and raised their fists. Even some of the enforcers who'd watched her with suspicion just days ago now looked at her with something approaching admiration. Lyra ran forward and threw her arms around Elena, tears streaming down her face. "You did it! You actually did it! You saved us all!" Elena hugged her back, overwhelmed by the flood of emotion threatening to break through her carefully maintained composure. Marin approached slowly, her expression unreadable. She stopped in front of Elena and studied her for a long, measuring moment. Then she inclined her head, a gesture of respect Elena had never expected to receive. "You have proven yourself, Elena Vale. You have my respect, and my apology for doubting you." Elena's throat tightened. "You were protecting your pack. I understand that." Marin's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "You're one of us now, whether you like it or not." The words settled over Elena like a mantle. One of us. She belonged. Darius appeared beside her, his hand resting on Kyle's shoulder. The boy's face was bright with happiness, his amber eyes shining. "The council wants to hold a formal ceremony tomorrow, to officially recognize what you've done for this pack." Elena shook her head. "I don't need recognition. I just need to know we're safe." "We are," Darius said, his voice firm. "Because of you." Kyle tugged on Elena's hand, his voice excited. "Does this mean you're staying? Forever?" Elena knelt down and looked him in the eye, seeing the hope and vulnerability there. "If you'll have me." Kyle's face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, and he threw himself into her arms. Elena held him close, feeling something crack and then heal inside her chest. And in that moment, surrounded by wolves who had once seen her as nothing more than a burden, Elena finally understood what it meant to be home. The celebration lasted 3 days. The Obsidian Fortress transformed from a place of cold discipline into something Elena had never seen before, a home filled with laughter, music, and the kind of joy that came from surviving the impossible. Warriors who normally stood rigid at their posts now danced in the courtyards. Children who'd been kept inside during the siege ran freely through the halls. Even the kitchens overflowed with food and warmth, Lyra working herself to exhaustion to feed everyone who came through the doors. But Elena couldn't quite let herself relax. She stood in her room on the second night, staring at her reflection in the small mirror on the wall. The girl looking back at her was almost unrecognizable from the broken, half-drowned creature who'd washed up on the riverbank 2 months ago. Her eyes were clearer now, her shoulders straighter. Her face no longer carried the haunted expression of someone waiting to be thrown away. She looked like someone who belonged. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," Elena called. Lyra entered, carrying a bundle of dark fabric in her arms. Her face was flushed with excitement. "The ceremony is tomorrow morning. Marin sent this for you to wear." She laid the bundle on the bed and stepped back. Elena approached slowly and unfolded the fabric. It was a dress, simple but beautiful, made of deep forest green silk that shimmered in the firelight. The cut was elegant,
fitted at the waist with long sleeves and a modest neckline. It was the kind of dress someone important would wear. "I can't accept this," Elena said, her throat tight. "You have to," Lyra said firmly. "You're being formally recognized by the pack. You can't show up in borrowed training clothes." Elena ran her fingers over the silk, her chest aching. "What exactly is this ceremony?" Lyra's expression softened. "Darius is going to declare you under his official protection. It means you're no longer a guest or a stranger. You're pack. No one can challenge your right to be here. No one can question your place." The words hit Elena like a physical weight. Pack. She'd never had that before. Never been part of something larger than herself. Never been claimed by anyone who actually wanted her. "What if I mess it up?" Elena whispered. Lyra crossed to her and took her hands. "You won't. You've already done the hard part. You've already proven yourself. This is just making it official." Elena nodded, trying to steady her breathing. Lyra smiled. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." She slipped out of the room, leaving Elena alone with the dress and her racing thoughts. Sleep didn't come easily. Elena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with everything that had happened. Drake was gone. The coalition had dissolved. The fortress was safe. But somehow the victory felt incomplete, like there was still something unfinished hanging in the air. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and wrapped herself in a thick cloak. She made her way through the quiet halls and up to the battlements, seeking the cold night air to clear her head. But when she reached the top of the stairs, she found she wasn't alone. Darius stood at the wall, his hands braced on the stone, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. He'd changed out of his battle-worn clothes into simple black pants and a loose shirt, but his posture was still tense, his shoulders tight. Elena hesitated, then approached quietly. "Couldn't sleep either?" Darius glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Too much to think about. Elena joined him at the wall, pulling her cloak tighter against the wind. "Like what?" Darius was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What comes next?" Elena frowned. "The ceremony?" "After the ceremony," Darius said. The other pack saw what happened at the challenge. They saw a human stand before 5 alphas and turn the tide of a war. Word is already spreading. Some will see it as proof that strength comes in unexpected forms. Others will see it as weakness, that I'm relying on a human to protect my territory. Elena's stomach twisted. "You think they'll challenge you?" "Someone always challenges," Darius said. "That's the nature of power. You hold it until someone stronger takes it from you." "You're the strongest alpha on the continent," Elena said. "Everyone knows that." Darius turned to look at her, his amber eyes intense. "Strength isn't just about winning fights. It's about making the right choices. And I chose to protect you when the easier path would have been to hand you over. Some will respect that choice. Others will call it a mistake." Elena's chest tightened. "Do you think it was a mistake?" "No," Darius said without hesitation. "But I need you to understand what you're walking into tomorrow. When I declare you pack, I'm not just protecting you, I'm binding you to this fortress, to these wolves, to everything that comes with being part of the Obsidian line. That includes the dangers." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I understand." "Do you?" Darius stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Because once this is done, there's no going back. You'll be a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. You'll be expected to uphold pack law, to defend this territory, to stand with us against whatever comes. This isn't just about having a home, Elena. It's about having a duty." Elena's heart pounded, but she didn't look away. "I've never had a home worth fighting for. Now I do. Whatever comes, I'll face it." Darius studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm despite the cold air. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. "You keep telling me that," Elena said. "Maybe one day I'll believe it." "You will," Darius said, "because tomorrow everyone will see it." He turned and walked away, leaving Elena alone on the battlements with her racing heart and the weight of what was coming. The ceremony began at dawn. The entire pack gathered in the Great Hall, a massive stone chamber with vaulted ceilings and walls lined with banners representing every major pack alliance in the territory's history.
Torches burned in iron sconces, casting flickering shadows across the assembled wolves. Elena stood at the entrance, dressed in the green silk dress Marin had sent, her hands trembling slightly. Lyra had braided her hair and helped her into the dress, whispering encouragement the entire time. But now, standing alone and facing a hall full of wolves, Elena felt her courage wavering. "Ready?" Kael's small voice came from beside her. Elena looked down and found the boy standing there, dressed in formal clothes that made him look older than his 6 years. His amber eyes were steady and calm. "I don't know," Elena admitted. Kael took her hand. "I'll be with you." The simple gesture steadied her. Together, they walked into the hall. The assembled wolves parted, creating a path straight to the front where Darius stood on a raised platform. He wore formal alpha regalia, black leather and silver, with the obsidian wolf crest emblazoned on his chest. He looked every inch the king he was. Beside him stood Marin and the senior council members, their expressions solemn and formal. Elena and Kael walked forward slowly, every eye in the hall tracking their movement. Elena could hear whispers rippling through the crowd, some approving, some skeptical, all curious. When they reached the platform, Kael released her hand and stepped to the side. Elena stood alone, facing Darius. The Alpha King's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something that might have been pride. He raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. "We are gathered here to witness a moment that has not occurred in 200 years, Darius said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "The formal recognition and protection of a human within the Obsidian Pack." A murmur ran through the crowd. Darius continued. "Elena Vale came to us not by choice, but by chance. She was thrown from Ravenfall Cliff and left to die. The river carried her to our borders, and my son found her. By every law we have, I should have turned her away or ended her life. She had no pack, no status, no right to be here." Elena's heart hammered. She knew this speech was necessary, knew Darius had to acknowledge the unconventional nature of her presence, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made her chest tight. "But she survived," Darius said, his voice growing stronger. "Against impossible odds, she survived. And in surviving, she proved herself worthy of consideration. So I allowed her to stay, to heal, to live among us." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled wolves. "And then Drake Holloway attacked our fortress, demanding her return. He brought an army of rogues. He formed a coalition of 5 packs. He threatened to burn everything we've built to the ground unless we surrendered her to him." The hall was absolutely silent now. "Elena could have run," Darius continued. "She could have left to save herself, to spare us the fight. But she didn't. Instead, she stood before this council and proposed a strategy that saved us all. She turned the tide of a war without lifting a weapon. She proved that strength comes in many forms, and that courage has nothing to do with the ability to shift." Darius descended from the platform and stood directly in front of Elena. "Elena Vale," he said formally, "do you accept the protection and responsibility of the Obsidian Pack? Do you swear to uphold our laws, defend our territory, and stand with us against all who threaten what we've built?" Elena's throat was so tight she could barely speak, but she forced the words out clear and steady. "I do." Darius's expression softened slightly. "Then, by the authority granted to me as Alpha King, I declare you Pack. You are under my protection. Anyone who harms you harms me. Anyone who challenges your right to be here challenges me." He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder, the gesture formal but weighted with meaning. "You are home," Darius said quietly, his voice for her alone. "And no one will take that from you again." Elena's vision blurred with tears she couldn't hold back anymore. The hall erupted, not with objection or protest, but with cheers and howls of approval. Warriors slammed their fists against their chests in the traditional gesture of acceptance. Women smiled and nodded. Even the skeptical council members inclined their heads in acknowledgement. Kael ran forward and wrapped his arms around Elena's waist, his face bright with joy. Elena knelt down and held him close, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Lyra appeared beside her, tears streaming down her face, and pulled them both into a fierce hug. Marin approached and offered her hand. Elena took it, and the older woman pulled her to her feet. "Welcome to the Pack, Elena Vale," Marin said. May you bring us as much strength in the future as you have in the past. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The celebration that followed was overwhelming. Wolves she'd never spoken to came forward to offer congratulations. Warriors shared stories of the battle and her strategy. Children asked if she'd really stood before 5 alphas and lived to tell about it. But through it all, Elena kept looking back at Darius, who stood at the edge of the hall, watching everything with that unreadable expression. Their eyes met across the crowd, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection, a promise of something neither of them had fully named yet. That night, after the celebration had finally died down and most of the pack had retired, Elena found herself in the library. It had become her quiet place, the room where she and Kyle spent their mornings, where she'd learned to read the histories of the pack, where she felt most at peace. She was sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames, when the door opened. Darius entered, still in his formal clothes, though he'd removed the heavy outer layer. He looked tired, but more relaxed than she'd seen him in weeks. "I thought I'd find you here," he said. Elena smiled faintly. "Needed some quiet." Darius crossed to the chair beside hers and sat down, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. For a while they sat in comfortable silence. Then Darius said, "There's something I need to tell you." Elena turned to look at him, her heart skipping. "What is it?" Darius was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When my mate died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I buried everything, the grief, the anger, the hope. I focused on being the Alpha King, on protecting this pack, on raising Kyle alone. I told myself that was enough." Elena's chest tightened. "And then you arrived," Darius continued, his voice low. "Broken and half dead, washed up on my land like a gift I didn't ask for. And Kyle, my son who hadn't spoken in 2 years, looked at you and chose you. He claimed you before I could even decide what to do with you." "Darius, let me finish," he said gently. "I told myself I was keeping you here for him, because he needed you, because you were helping him heal, and that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." Elena's breath caught. Darius turned to face her fully, his amber eyes burning with intensity. "You changed something in this fortress. In my son. In me. You made us remember what it felt like to hope, to care about something beyond survival. And when Drake came for you, I realized I wasn't just protecting you for Kael's sake. I was protecting you because I couldn't imagine this place without you." Elena's hands trembled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between watching you fight to survive and watching you fight to save us all, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Elena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I'm human. I don't care. I can't shift. I can't give you what a wolf mate could." "I don't care," Darius repeated, his voice fierce. "You're strong enough without it. You're everything I need without it." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to be what you need." Darius reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You already are. You just have to choose to stay." Elena's breath shuddered. "I'm scared." "So am I," Darius admitted, but I'm more scared of losing you than I am of taking this risk." Elena looked into his eyes and saw nothing but truth. No deception, no manipulation, just raw, honest feeling. She'd spent her entire life being told she wasn't enough, that she was worthless, that she had nothing to offer. But Darius saw her differently. He saw strength where others saw weakness, courage where others saw fear, worth where others saw nothing. "I love you too," Elena whispered. Darius's expression transformed, something fierce and tender and absolutely unguarded flooding across his face. And then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. But when Elena kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into that single moment, the gentleness turned to hunger. They broke apart, both breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "Stay," Darius whispered against her lips. "Not as a guest. Not as someone under my protection. Stay as my mate, my partner, my queen." Elena's heart soared and shattered and rebuilt itself all at once. "Yes," she breathed.
Yes.
3 months later, the Obsidian Fortress hosted an event that would be talked about for generations. The bonding ceremony between Alpha King Darius Voss and Elena Vale. Wolves from across the continent traveled to witness the unprecedented union, an Alpha King taking a human as his mate. Some came out of respect, others out of curiosity. A few came hoping to see the alliance fail. But when Elena walked into the Great Hall, dressed in silver and white, her hand clasped firmly in Kael's as he led her forward, even the skeptics fell silent. She looked like a queen, not because of the dress or the ceremony or the formal recognition, but because of the way she carried herself, shoulders back, head high, eyes clear and unafraid. She'd survived being thrown away. She'd survived the river. She'd survived an army at the gates. And she'd done it all without shifting, without power, without anything except her own stubborn refusal to give up. Darius stood at the front of the hall, his expression proud and fierce as he watched her approach. When Elena reached him, Kael released her hand and stepped back to stand with Lyra and Marin, all three of them smiling. The formal bonding ritual was ancient, words spoken in the old language, vows exchanged before witnesses, hands clasped over a ceremonial blade that symbolized the cutting away of old ties and the forging of new ones. When Darius spoke his vows, his voice was steady and absolute. I claim you as my mate, my partner, my equal. I swear to protect you, to stand with you, to honor you in all things. You are mine, and I am yours, from this day until our last. Elena repeated the words, her voice clear and strong, and felt something ancient and powerful settle over both of them like a mantle. The hall erupted in cheers and howls as Darius pulled her into his arms and kissed her before the entire gathered assembly. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. A week after the bonding, Elena stood on the battlements at sunrise, watching the forest wake beneath a sky painted in gold and pink. Footsteps approached from behind. Thought I'd find you here, Darius said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and warm and utterly content. It's peaceful up here. It is, Darius agreed. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Kael's asking for you. He wants to show you something in the greenhouse. Elena smiled. Those seedlings he planted? They bloomed yesterday, red flowers, just like he hoped. Elena's chest tightened with emotion. Those flowers, the ones Kael had planted in memory of his mother, had finally bloomed. It felt symbolic, like something broken had finally healed. Come on, Darius said gently. Let's go see them together. They walked through the fortress hand in hand, passing wolves who bowed their heads in respect and greeting. Some called her my queen now, a title that still felt strange but was slowly becoming familiar. In the greenhouse, Kael stood beside the blooming flowers, his face bright with pride. Look, Mama, he said excitedly, using the name he'd started calling Elena weeks ago. Elena knelt beside him and examined the delicate red petals. They're beautiful, Kael. Your mother would have loved them. Kael beamed. Do you think she can see them, wherever she is? Elena pulled him into a hug. I think she can, and I think she's proud of you. Kael hugged her back fiercely. Darius watched them from the doorway, his expression soft in a way only they ever got to see. Elena looked up and met his gaze over Kael's head, and in that moment, everything came full circle. She'd been thrown away as worthless, cast into a freezing river and left to die, washed up on hostile shores with nothing but the will to survive. And now she stood in a fortress filled with wolves, holding the son of the most powerful alpha on the continent, bonded to a king who loved her exactly as she was. She'd gone from having nothing to having everything, from being nobody to being someone who mattered, from surviving to truly living. Months later, when the winter snows came and the fortress settled into the quiet rhythm of the cold season, Elena stood before the gathered pack council for the first time as queen. The council chamber was filled with the senior advisors, warriors, and representatives from allied packs. They'd come to discuss trade agreements, border disputes, and the usual business of running a territory. But before any of that could begin, Alpha Morgana of the Northern Reaches stood and addressed the room. I want to speak on behalf of the allied packs, she said, her voice carrying authority. When we first heard that Alpha King Darius had taken a human as his mate, many of us were skeptical. Some called it weakness. Others called it madness. Elena's heart beat faster, but she kept her expression neutral. But we've watched, Alpha Morgana continued. We've seen how Queen Elena has strengthened this pack, not through shifting or fighting, but through wisdom and courage. We've seen how the Obsidian Fortress has grown more stable, more united, under her influence. The other allied representatives nodded in agreement. And so we come before this council today to formally acknowledge Queen Elena Vale as a legitimate ruler and to extend our respect and alliance to her as well as to the Alpha King. The chamber erupted in murmurs of approval. Elena felt Darius's hand find hers beneath the table, squeezing gently. She stood slowly, her voice steady. Thank you, Alpha Morgana. I accept your acknowledgement with humility and promise to serve this pack and our allies with everything I have. The council members rose and bowed their heads in formal respect. And in that moment, Elena truly understood what she'd become. Not just a survivor, not just someone who'd been lucky enough to wash up on the right shore, but a queen who'd earned her place through trial, through fire, through refusing to give up even when the world told her she had no value. That night, as Elena lay in bed beside Darius with Kyle asleep in the adjoining room, she thought about the girl she'd been on Ravenfall Cliff. Broken, terrified, convinced she was about to die. If that girl could see her now, bonded to an Alpha King, mother to a child who'd chosen her, respected by packs across the continent, she wouldn't believe it. But it was real, all of it. What are you thinking about? Darius murmured in the darkness. Elena smiled. How far I've come. How different everything is. Darius pulled her closer. Any regrets? Not one, Elena said. Good, Darius said, because you're stuck with us now. Elena laughed softly. I can think of worse fates. They lay in comfortable silence for a while. Then Darius said quietly, You know what the pack is calling you? What? The queen who survived. They're already writing songs about the human who turned the tide of a war and won the heart of the most feared alpha on the continent. Elena groaned. That's embarrassing. That's legacy, Darius corrected. Years from now, when KL rules this territory, they'll still tell stories about you, about the girl who washed up from the river and changed everything. Elena turned to face him in the darkness, her hand resting on his chest. I just wanted to survive. You did more than survive, Darius said, his voice fierce with conviction. You thrived. You built something from nothing. You proved that strength has nothing to do with shifting or bloodlines or any of the things we thought mattered. You proved that the only thing that truly matters is refusing to give up. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I love you. I love you too, Darius said. My queen, my mate, my everything. They held each other in the darkness, two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds. And outside, the Obsidian Fortress stood strong against the winter night. A symbol of power, yes, but also of hope. Because within those ancient walls lived proof that anyone could rise from nothing, that anyone could overcome the odds, that anyone, even a girl thrown into a river and left to die, could become a queen. Elena drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, surrounded by warmth and love, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She'd survived the river. She'd survived Drake. She'd survived every challenge the world had thrown at her. And now, finally, she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Truly, completely, magnificently living. The girl who'd been thrown away as worthless had become the queen of the most powerful wolf dynasty alive. And her story, the story of survival, courage, and unbreakable will, would be told for generations to come.